She kept her jacket on in the heat, until the Mafia boss spotted the marks on her arm. Merchants shouted their wares, and the scent of roasted nuts and burning wood mingled in the air. Yet amidst this ordinary chaos, one figure moved differently: Alara. She wore a dark jacket, heavy despite the heat, and long sleeves that hid her arms. Her steps were measured, cautious, as though she expected the world to notice her the way she dreaded it would. People brushed past her without a second glance, but her gaze never left the path ahead. She was aware of the city's pulse, the hidden whispers, the flickers of movement that suggested more than street vendors and common folk. Alara knew why she had to cover herself. The marks on her arms were not just scars. They were symbols of a curse, faint yet persistent, etched by hands that no longer existed but whose power lingered. She had learned to keep them hidden. The heat was unbearable, but revealing them was far worse. It was in the crowded marketplace that Lucian first saw her. He was perched on the steps of his family's mansion, a shadow among shadows, watching the flow of the city like a predator surveying prey. Young, but already feared, the heir to the Ardeth family, the city's most powerful Mafia lineage, was not easily startled. Yet something about the woman walking among the vendors caught his attention. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, and cautious all at once. She did not belong in the marketplace. She belonged somewhere else, somewhere darker, somewhere the ordinary eye could not see. And when she adjusted her sleeve just slightly, he saw it. The marks. They were faint, curling like tendrils of smoke across her skin. He knew the legends, whispered late at night in the alleys and private chambers of noble houses. The shadow-bound, cursed by a sorceress who had died centuries ago. People said their magic was dangerous, that their fate was always tied to tragedy. Lucian's heart did not race with fear. It raced with intrigue. He stepped down from the stone steps, his boots clicking against the cobblestones. The crowd parted instinctively as he moved, some bowing heads, others shrinking away. Alara had sensed someone watching her long before he reached her, but when he finally came close, she froze. There was an authority about him, a quiet dominance that did not shout but demanded attention. "You shouldn't walk like that," Lucian said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "You shouldn't hide what isn't yours to hide." Alara's breath caught. She wanted to run, to vanish into the twisting streets, but curiosity held her in place. "And you are?" she asked, her voice cautious, measured. "Someone who knows what those marks mean," he replied, lifting a hand slightly, just enough to indicate awareness without intrusion. "You carry a burden you do not fully understand." She swallowed hard. She had spent years fleeing from men like him, men who wanted to own power, to manipulate it, to weaponize it. Yet there was something different here. He did not strike like a threat immediately. Instead, he radiated a dangerous calm, like a blade waiting to be drawn. "I don't need your warnings," she said, though her words were softer than she intended. Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly, curious. "I do not offer warnings. I offer understanding. And perhaps protection if you are willing to accept it." Alara stiffened. Protection from a man like him was not a promise, it was a trap. He was powerful, dangerous, and surrounded by shadows she could feel even from where she stood. Yet despite herself, she wanted to hear more, to know why someone like him would care. Before she could reply, a street vendor shouted angrily at a child who had dropped a basket of fruit. The commotion broke the moment, and Alara used it as her chance. She spun on her heel and dashed into a narrow alleyway, the heat and the city's noise fading behind her. Lucian followed, silently, weaving through the twisting paths. It was as if he could anticipate where she would go. She darted through doorways, past shuttered shops, and into a deserted courtyard, hoping to lose him. But he emerged from the shadows as if he had been there all along. "You cannot run from this," he said quietly, but with an undeniable weight. "Your curse, it is tied to something much larger than you imagine." Alara stopped, her back against the cold stone wall, chest heaving. She wanted to scream at him to leave, to let her vanish like smoke, but the truth was more frightening. She had always hoped someone would notice, someone who could see beyond the marks, beyond the fear. "And if I refuse your help?" she asked, her voice steady now, even though her mind raced. Lucian's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, but his presence did not waver. "Then you will face it alone, and I will not stop watching." A shiver ran down her spine. Watching was as dangerous as any curse. He would not intervene, but he would not let her escape. And she realized something she did not want to admit. She wanted him to intervene. "I'm not anyone important," she said finally, trying to dismiss the pull she felt. "Everyone important carries a mark," he replied. His eyes flicked to her sleeve, then back to her face. "Some marks are visible, some are hidden. Yours are both." For a moment the world around them fell away. The sound of the city, the heat, the distant cries, all faded into nothing. It was just the two of them in that quiet courtyard, and a tension neither fully understood. One of danger, yes, but also of something far more complicated. Something that could ignite into connection or destruction. Alara's heart hammered. She knew enough about the Shadowbound to understand the stakes. Magic was never free. Curses demanded payment. And yet, for the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone. "Why are you here?" she whispered. "Why do you care?" Lucian took a step closer, careful, measured. He did not touch her, but the proximity was enough to make the air between them crackle. "Because your curse is mine as well," he said. The words were a quiet confession, heavy with implications. "Our fates are entwined whether you wish it or not." Alara's breath caught. She had always run from entanglements. Love, friendship, alliances, all had been too dangerous, too tied to weakness. And yet here was a man who was danger itself, saying that he and she were bound together by forces neither could control. She wanted to argue, to flee, to hide again under her jacket. But the truth pressed in too strongly. She could not ignore him. Not now. Not when the pull between them was as undeniable as the heat pressing down from the sun. A sudden wind swept through the alley, lifting her hair and tugging at the edges of her jacket. For a brief moment, she felt the curse stir beneath her skin. Shadows danced along the walls, small and flickering, responding to her unease. She realized with a pang of fear that Lucian could feel it too. "Do you know what this means?" he asked, his voice low. "That if you do not control it, it will control you." Alara swallowed hard. She had spent years learning to hide it, to suppress it, to deny its existence. And yet she knew he was right. The curse had a mind of its own, and it thrived on fear, secrecy, and isolation. I can manage it," she said, but the words felt hollow. Lucian tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Can you?" His question was not an accusation. It was a challenge, and beneath it she sensed care. Dangerous, complicated, impossible care. Before she could respond, a distant bell tolled, echoing across the city. It was the signal that the marketplace was closing. That day was ending, and night would soon bring its own dangers. Alara's instincts screamed at her to leave, to disappear into the night before he could follow her further. She backed away, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. "I should go," she said. Lucian did not move. "You will run and I will find you," he said quietly, almost as a promise. "Whether you want me to or not." Alara hesitated, torn between fear and something she could not name. The heat, the curse, the city, all of it pressed in on her, and yet amidst it there was a spark of possibility, a spark she had not allowed herself to feel in years. With a final glance, she turned and vanished into the twisting streets, leaving Lucian in the courtyard, silent and watching. He stood there for a long moment, eyes following where she had disappeared. Something about her haunted him, not just the marks, not just the mystery, but something deeper, a pull he did not yet understand. And somewhere in the distance, hidden in the shadows, the wind whispered around her jacket, curling like fingers across her arms. The curse had noticed him too. And so the game began. Night had fallen over the city like a velvet cloak. Shadows pooled in the streets, hiding both danger and opportunity. The marketplace, bustling and loud just hours ago, now lay empty except for the occasional figure moving quickly, hooded and cautious. Somewhere above, the windows of Lucian's mansion glowed faintly, warm light spilling out into the darkness like a beacon of both power and secrets. Ilara walked swiftly, her jacket heavy on her shoulders despite the night air. The city was quieter now, yet she could feel eyes in every shadow. Not just human eyes, there were forces at work she could sense, currents of magic rippling beneath the surface. Her curse, ever present, stirred in response, tiny tremors of energy under her skin. It was restless, aware of the man who had spotted her earlier. Lucian had not disappeared, of course. He never disappeared. While she moved through twisting alleys and empty courtyards, he watched from a distance, silent as a shadow himself. His presence was felt rather than seen, an unspoken force that pressed against her consciousness, an invisible hand guiding the night's events. He did not follow recklessly. He moved with the patience of a hunter who knew his prey would not easily submit. Ilara paused on the steps of a deserted fountain, its water black under the moonlight. She had to decide, stay and face him, or run deeper into the city where the maze of streets might offer temporary safety. Her instincts urged her to run, but a strange, unwilling curiosity held her in place. Lucian appeared then, stepping from the darkness like a figure drawn from a dream or a nightmare. His expression was calm, almost unreadable, but the weight of his presence was undeniable. "You should not wander alone," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the quiet night, "especially when forces are aware of you that you cannot see." Ilara kept her jacket tight around her, hiding the marks that had first drawn his attention. "I am not defenseless," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Her heart was racing. Every instinct screamed that she should flee, yet part of her ached to hear him speak, to understand why he cared or claimed to care. Lucian tilted his head slightly, regarding her carefully. "Defenseless," he echoed. "Perhaps, but your magic, your curse, it can be dangerous both to yourself and to others. You do not fully understand it yet." Ilara's fingers twitched at her sides. He knew too much, more than anyone should. And yet there was no accusation in his voice, only observation, a cold, calculated awareness. "I am managing it," she said finally. "I have always managed it." He stepped closer and she felt the subtle pressure of his presence, not threatening but impossible to ignore. "And yet," he said quietly, "you are here and I am here. Neither of us chose this meeting by accident." The air seemed to thicken between them. Shadows clung to their movements, curling around their forms as though the night itself was aware of the tension. Ilara felt it, the silent pull of danger mixed with something deeper, something dangerous and thrilling. "I do not know what you want from me," she admitted, her voice softer now. "Why are you following me?" Lucian paused, his eyes glinting faintly under the street lamps. "Because your fate touches mine," he said. "And because someone like you, someone cursed like you, cannot survive alone for long." She stiffened at the words. Survival was a burden she had borne alone for years. Trusting anyone, even slightly, was a risk she had never been willing to take. And yet his words stirred a longing she had buried deep, a desire not just to survive but to be understood, to be seen without fear or judgment. Before she could respond, a flicker of movement in the shadows caught her attention, something unnatural. The air shimmered briefly as if charged with energy. Ilara felt the stirrings of her curse awaken, small sparks of power rippling beneath her skin. Lucian noticed it too. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear but in recognition. "It is reacting," he murmured. "Not just to you, to me as well." Ilara's breath caught. She had always thought of her curse as something personal, something she alone had to control. But now she realized it responded to him, to his presence, to the bond she did not yet fully understand. "Why are you here?" she asked again, more urgently. "Why do you care so much?" "Because if you do not control it, it will control you," he said. And if it controls you, it could destroy more than just yourself. She swallowed, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had spent years hiding, running, and suppressing the curse, but she had never truly faced the consequences of its power. The realization was frightening, but also strangely liberating. For the first time, she understood that she did not have to face it entirely alone. Lucian stepped closer, careful, deliberate. The air between them seemed to hum, charged with the tension of unspoken possibilities. "I can help you," he said, "if you are willing to trust me." Alara's heart raced. Trust was a dangerous game, but she sensed that refusing him now would be just as dangerous. "And why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "Because you have no choice," he replied, his tone both gentle and unyielding. "Fate does not wait for consent, and neither do the forces that marked you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Alara wanted to run, to hide under the protective weight of her jacket, but something inside her shifted. A spark of courage, or perhaps desperation, rose within her. "Fine," she said finally, "but I will not be controlled." Lucian's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Nor would I wish to control you," he said, "only to guide you and perhaps to walk beside you." The words carried an unexpected weight, and Alara felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she did not have to bear her burden entirely alone. But as they moved together through the twisting streets, both aware of the silent currents around them, danger waited. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the faint whisper of magic stirred in the air. Her curse was awake, and the city itself seemed to pulse with a hidden, watchful awareness. Lucian and Alara came to a quiet square, abandoned now except for the soft flicker of a lone street lamp. The night was still, yet charged with energy. Alara felt it, the pull of her curse, the subtle warning of forces she could not name, and the undeniable presence of the man who had become an unwilling anchor in her chaotic world. "You feel it too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," he replied. "And we cannot ignore it. There are powers at work here, older and stronger than either of us. If we are to survive, we must face them together." Her stomach twisted with both fear and anticipation. Facing it together, the words were dangerous, intimate, and impossible. She had always kept herself apart from others, but the pull of his presence was undeniable. And deep down, she knew that running now would only delay the inevitable confrontation with both her curse and him. As the wind swept through the square, lifting the edges of her jacket, Alara realized something frightening and thrilling. She was not alone, and for the first time in years she felt the possibility of hope, an uneasy, fragile hope, but hope nonetheless. "Then we face it," she said finally. "Together." Lucian inclined his head, a silent acknowledgement. "Together," he repeated. And in the quiet of the night, amidst the unseen currents of power and the shadows of the city, the bond between them began to take shape. Not yet trust, not yet friendship, but a connection born of shared danger, mutual understanding, and the unspoken pull of fate. The night deepened, and somewhere in the unseen corners of the city, a faint pulse of magic stirred. The curse had noticed him too, and so the dance began. Every step they took, every whispered word, every unspoken glance would carry them further into a world of shadows, secrets, and power. A world where trust would be tested, where danger was constant, and where the pull between them, both perilous and irresistible, would grow stronger with every passing moment. Alara kept her jacket tightly around her shoulders, not because she feared the heat, but because the marks beneath it, the curse beneath it, were awakening. And Lucian, dangerous, powerful, and inevitable, was the only one who might understand them, guide them, or survive their consequences alongside her. The night was theirs for now. But dawn would bring new challenges, new threats, and new choices that could bind, or break, the fragile alliance between them. And neither could yet see the shadow that lingered, patient and watching, waiting for the moment to strike. The moon hung low over the city, casting silver light on streets that twisted and wound like the veins of some ancient, sleeping beast. Alara moved through the darkness with cautious steps, her jacket still shielding the faint scars on her arms. The night was quiet, but not empty. She could feel the stir of something older, deeper, and far more dangerous than the city's ordinary dangers. Lucian followed at a distance, silent, almost part of the shadows themselves. He had said very little since their uneasy truce in the square, but his presence was constant, a weight she could not ignore. Alara wanted to resent him, to push him away as she had done with everyone in her life, but the truth was unavoidable. She felt safer with him near, even if that safety carried a tension she could not define. They arrived at a deserted courtyard at the edge of the city, an old place where the walls of collapsed buildings formed jagged shapes against the night sky. Here, Alara often came to test her control over the curse. Away from the city's eyes, the magic beneath her skin could stir freely without consequence, or so she hoped. Lucian stepped closer, his boots echoing softly against the broken stone. "We need to understand it," he said quietly. "The curse, your powers. They are connected to my family more than I expected." Alara stiffened. "Connected to your family," she echoed. "How? I've lived all my life hiding from this. I've never known anyone else was involved." His gaze met hers, steady and intense. "Because the sorceress who marked you, she did not act alone, or randomly. She was tied to the Ardeth bloodline. And that means you and I," he paused, letting the weight of his words hang. "We are bound whether we wish it or not." Alara's chest tightened. She had feared fate, had feared magic, but she had never imagined her life would be so intertwined with someone else, especially someone as formidable as Lucian. Her mind raced with questions. Could she trust him? Could she even survive the consequences of this connection? "I do not want to be bound to anyone," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. "Especially not you." Lucian's expression softened, though the strength in his presence remained. "Nor would I wish to bind you," he said. "But the curse is not something we can ignore. It has a will of its own, and soon it will test us both." Alara glanced at him, trying to read his intentions. He was difficult to decipher. There was no cruelty in his words, no demand for submission, only a quiet insistence that she could not ignore. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, she sensed a pull she had not felt in years. A pull that was dangerous and exhilarating at the same time. Before she could reply, a sudden chill swept through the courtyard. The shadows twisted unnaturally, coiling like living things. Alara felt her pulse quicken. The curse responded, rippling beneath her skin like tiny sparks of electricity. It was alive and it was aware. Lucian noticed it immediately. "It's reacting," he said, his voice low and tense. "To us both, be careful." Alara nodded, though her heart raced with both fear and excitement. She had learned to control her power through isolation and secrecy, but now it was clear that it was not meant to be tamed alone. And Lucian's presence amplified it, made it pulse stronger. She did not fully understand why, but the connection between them had become undeniable. For hours, they studied the curse, moving carefully through the courtyard, testing its limits and responding to its warnings. Shadows danced along the walls, curling and stretching as if alive, and the faint scent of something ancient and otherworldly hung in the air. "You are stronger than you think," Lucian said after a while, watching her manipulate the energy that rose beneath her skin. "But strength without control is dangerous, and right now you are powerful but untested." Alara swallowed, feeling both pride and fear. She had always known she was different, but she had never faced her own potential with another person watching. And yet she could not deny that his presence made her focus sharper, her control more precise. "I've survived this long on my own," she said, her voice steady now. "I will continue to survive, with or without you." Lucian's eyes softened with a mixture of respect and something deeper, an emotion she could not name. "Survival is not the same as control," he replied. "And if we are to survive what comes next, you will need guidance, whether you accept it or not." The wind picked up suddenly, whistling through the broken walls. Shadows lengthened and stretched across the courtyard, and Alara felt the magic stir violently beneath her skin. For a brief moment, it surged uncontrollably, a flash of dark energy that threatened to lash out. Lucian stepped closer instinctively, his hand brushing against hers, not in touch but in proximity that made the air between them almost shimmer. "Focus," he said, his voice calm but insistent. "You are stronger than this moment. Remember control." Alara drew a deep breath, centering herself. Slowly, the surge calmed, the shadows retreating back into their corners. She exhaled, her chest heaving with the effort and the realization that she was not alone in this fight. Lucian's steady presence had anchored her, and for the first time she allowed herself to acknowledge the trust that was forming between them. Hours passed in this delicate balance, training, observation, and silent acknowledgement of the bond that was growing. They spoke little, but the unspoken words were heavier than any conversation. Each glance, each measured movement, carried the weight of shared danger and the hint of connection neither had expected. As the night deepened, they heard a faint sound, soft, almost imperceptible like the rustle of silk across stone. Alara froze. The curse reacted instantly, shadows flaring around her like protective wings. Lucian's eyes narrowed, alert and ready. "Something approaches," he said quietly. "Stay behind me." Alara hesitated, torn between fear and instinct. She had always faced danger alone, relying on her speed and magic to survive. But now, with Lucian at her side, she felt a strange certainty. He would not fail her and she would not fail him. From the darkness emerged a figure, cloaked and silent, moving with deliberate steps. The air around them shimmered unnaturally, and Alara recognized immediately. This was not human. It was an echo of the sorceress who had marked her centuries ago, a ghostly remnant of the power that had shaped her life. "You feel it too," she whispered to Lucian, barely moving her lips. "I do," he replied, his voice steady, "and we cannot ignore it." The figure raised a hand, and the shadows in the courtyard thickened, coiling around them like living ropes. Alara felt her curse stir, responding instinctively, matching the power in the air. She had never felt anything so intense. Not fear, not danger, not even loneliness. Only the rush of magic and the knowledge that she and Lucian were bound in this moment, for better or worse. Lucian stepped forward, his own aura flaring subtly, a quiet warning and shield. "You do not belong here," he said to the figure. "We are not yours to manipulate." The figure tilted its head, and the faintest laugh echoed through the courtyard, like wind through broken glass. "You are stronger than I expected," it said, voice hollow and distant. "But one of you will betray the other before the curse is broken. Remember that." Alara's stomach twisted at the words, a mixture of fear and defiance rising within her. She glanced at Lucian, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them, a promise, a warning, and a challenge all at once. "What does that mean?" she whispered, voice trembling. Lucian did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached out just enough to brush a hand near hers, a gesture of reassurance and connection. "It means we will face trials," he said finally, "and the curse will test more than just our strength. It will test our trust, our bond, our choices." Alara nodded, understanding dawning in her chest. She had always been alone. She had always fought for survival. But now she was part of something larger, something dangerous, and yet impossibly exhilarating. She realized that the bond forming between them was no longer optional. It was necessary. The figure vanished into the shadows as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only a whisper and the lingering pulse of magic. Alara and Lucian stood in the courtyard, the night pressing in around them. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Ilara took a deep breath, feeling the surge of her power calm beneath her skin. "I am," she said. "I don't know what comes next, but I am ready." Lucian inclined his head. "Then we face it together." And in the quiet of the night, amidst the shadows and the pulse of magic, the fragile bond between them strengthened. They were no longer just two individuals connected by fate. They were a team, a pair bound by trust, necessity, and the growing, dangerous pull between them. But even as they left the courtyard, unaware of the city sleeping beneath the moonlight, the echo of the sorceress' words lingered. "One of you will betray the other before the curse is broken." The warning haunted them both, a shadow at the edge of their steps, a reminder that the path ahead would test not just their strength, but their hearts. And the dance of trust, danger, and unspoken desire had only just begun. The city was asleep beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds. Lightning split the darkness above, illuminating the jagged rooftops and winding streets below. Rain began to fall, cold and relentless, washing over the alleys, the fountains, and the shattered stone of forgotten courtyards. Ilara pulled her jacket tighter around herself, the marks on her arms hidden but pulsing faintly beneath the fabric. The curse had grown stronger, more insistent, as if sensing the approaching climax. Lucian walked beside her, silent, his presence a quiet anchor amidst the chaos. He did not speak, but Ilara felt the weight of his focus, the readiness in his every step. Tonight they would confront the forces that had haunted her life for so long, and perhaps, finally, break the bond of the curse. "We are close," Lucian said at last, his voice steady but edged with tension. "The source of your curse, the remnants of the sorceress magic, lies at the heart of the city beneath the old palace. That is where we will face it." Ilara nodded, though fear tightened her chest. She had survived alone for years, but tonight was different. Tonight the curse was awake, aware, and the stakes were no longer just her survival. They were theirs together. The palace loomed ahead, abandoned yet imposing, its towers jagged silhouettes against the storm-dark sky. The gates were open, creaking faintly as the wind pressed against them. Shadows seemed to ripple along the walls, alive with memory and magic. Inside, the air was thick with the pulse of power. Candles flickered in unseen corners, their light reflecting on cracked marble floors and walls etched with symbols that thrummed with energy. Ilara felt the curse respond, shadows rising along her arms beneath the fabric of her jacket, coiling and twitching like restless serpents. Lucian stepped closer, his hand brushing briefly against hers, a grounding touch in the midst of uncertainty. "Trust yourself," he said softly, "and trust me. Whatever happens, we face it together." Ilara swallowed hard. Trust had always been a luxury she could not afford. Yet here, standing at the edge of the ancient magic, she realized it was the only weapon she truly had. They moved through the palace in silence, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The corridors were narrow and winding, lined with mirrors that reflected shadows that were not quite their own. Ilara could feel the eyes of the sorceress lingering magic on them, testing, probing, challenging. Finally, they reached the inner sanctum, a vast chamber, circular with a ceiling high above, lost in darkness. Symbols glowed faintly along the walls, pulsing in rhythm with the storm outside. In the center, a figure awaited, a shadow of the sorceress flickering and half-formed, her voice echoing like wind through stone. "You have come," the apparition said, voice both melodic and hollow. "But one of you will betray the other before the curse is broken." Ilara's stomach twisted. She glanced at Lucian, seeing in his eyes the same fear she felt mirrored: betrayal. It was not a choice she could contemplate, yet the prophecy lingered, a shadow over every heartbeat. Lucian stepped forward, his presence steadying. "We face this together," he said, not just to her, but to the apparition and to the curse itself. "No betrayal will happen. Not while we stand side by side." The sorceress' shadow laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We shall see," she said, and the chamber trembled. Magic surged, dark and oppressive, pressing against them from all sides. Alara felt the curse stir violently beneath her skin, shadows flaring and twisting. She could see glimpses of her own fear reflected in the dark, but also glimpses of power, raw, untamed, waiting for direction. "Control it," Lucian said, his hand brushing against hers, sending a current of calm through the storm of her power. "Focus on what you want, not what the curse wants." Alara drew a deep breath. The storm of magic inside her responded, flickering with hesitation before she shaped it with her will. Shadows coiled around her like protective wings, reaching out to shield them both. She felt the pull of the sorceress magic, cold and insistent, trying to force fear, doubt, and mistrust into her heart. "You fear me," the shadow said, voice soft now insidious. "You fear him, and that fear will undo you both." Alara met Lucian's gaze. In his eyes she saw no judgment, no demand, only a steady trust that anchored her. She realized then that the curse thrived not on strength alone, but on doubt, isolation, and fear. If she wanted freedom, she had to let go of all of that. "I do not fear him," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "I fear nothing that cannot be faced together." Lucian nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Then we are ready." The sorceress shadow surged forward, dark tendrils of magic lashing out, aiming to overwhelm them. Alara and Lucian moved as one, instinct and trust guiding them. Shadows from her curse coiled to meet the attack, while Lucian's calm presence guided her focus, amplifying her control rather than diminishing it. The battle was not one of violence, but of wills, magic clashing against magic, light against dark, fear against trust. The chamber trembled, the storm outside echoing the turmoil within. Alara could feel herself grow stronger with every pulse of power, every careful movement of control. And she could feel Lucian beside her, not dominating, not controlling, but walking the path with her, every step synchronized, every glance a reassurance. Hours or perhaps moments, time had lost meaning, passed in the clash. And then, in a sudden surge, the shadow hesitated, its form flickering, unstable. Alara recognized the opening. Summoning every ounce of control she possessed, she focused on the bond they shared, the trust and connection they had built, and not on fear. A brilliant pulse of energy burst from her, light mingling with shadow, twisting and merging until the dark tendrils of the sorceress, magic shattered like glass. The apparition screamed, dissolving into the air, leaving only the echo of her words and the silence of the chamber. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted, the storm of power within her finally calming. Lucian knelt beside her, his hand steadying her, anchoring her to reality. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it together." For the first time in years, Alara allowed herself to breathe fully, to feel the release of tension that had bound her heart and magic for so long. The curse had been broken, not by isolation, not by fear, but by trust, courage, and connection. She looked up at Lucian, her jacket still shielding the faint marks, and for a moment words were unnecessary. The bond they had forged, tested through fear and power, danger and magic, spoke louder than any confession could. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "For staying, for trusting me." Lucian's hand brushed her cheek gently, a touch that was neither possessive nor commanding but protective and full of meaning. "We saved each other," he said simply. "That is thanks enough." The storm outside began to fade, the rain softening to a drizzle. Lightning still flashed occasionally, illuminating the chamber with stark brilliance, but the danger had passed. The city below, oblivious to the battle that had unfolded within its walls, slept peacefully. Alara rose slowly, feeling the exhaustion in her limbs but also a profound sense of relief. The curse, the shadows, the prophecy, they had all tested her, but she had survived. And more than that, she had chosen to face the world not alone, but with someone she could trust. Lucian walked beside her, quiet and steady, as they made their way back through the palace. Neither spoke much. Words felt unnecessary after what they had endured. Every glance, every shared step carried the weight of unspoken understanding. Outside, the city glimmered under the clearing sky. Rain-soaked streets reflected the faint light of dawn, promising a new beginning. Alara felt the first real warmth in her chest in years, a spark of hope that had nothing to do with magic or survival, but everything to do with connection, trust, and choice. "Where do we go from here?" she asked softly, her voice tentative but full of possibility. Lucian looked at her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Wherever we choose," he replied. "The past has shaped us, but it does not define us. Together we decide the next step." Alara smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and wonder. For so long, her life had been defined by fear, isolation, and the shadow of a curse. Now she felt the freedom to choose, to walk forward without running, to embrace trust and even the possibility of something deeper. The city slowly came to life around them, vendors preparing their stalls, the first rays of sunlight glinting off rooftops. But for Alara and Lucian, the world had shifted. Danger would always exist, as would challenges and shadows, but they had faced the greatest one together, and had survived. And in the quiet aftermath, as they walked side by side, a sense of calm and purpose settled over them. The curse was gone, the shadow of prophecy broken, and in its place remained only the bond they had forged, tested, fractured, and ultimately unbreakable. They walked into the new day, not as individuals burdened by fate, but as partners bound by choice, courage, and the trust that comes from surviving together. And though shadows would always linger at the edges of their world, they no longer controlled it, or them. The dance of trust, danger, and connection had reached its climax. And for the first time, both Alara and Lucian understood that redemption, freedom, and even love could exist, even in a world shaped by shadows and curses.